Chapter 1. The silence in the dining room was a presence in itself, a thick, suffocating thing that clung to the damask tablecloth and muted the clink of silver against porcelain. It was the sort of silence that follows a pronouncement of doom, though the executioner, my sister Charlotte, was still dabbing at her lips with a napkin, a faint tremor in her hand the only betrayal of the moment's gravity. The air, heavy with the scent of roasted bird and sage stuffing, had turned sour in my lungs. Around the mahogany table, the faces of my family were a gallery of carefully composed masks. My father, Arthur, with his leonine mane of silver hair, stared at the carcass of the turkey as if it held the secrets of the universe. My mother, Eleanor, a woman whose beauty had curdled into a kind of brittle fragility, examined her wineglass with the intensity of a jeweler. My brother, Julian, ever the follower, simply mirrored the stern disappointment on our father's face. They were a tableau of judgment, a living portrait of a jury that had already reached its verdict. It was Charlotte who finally broke the spell. She placed her napkin down with exaggerated care and stood, her frame taut and righteous. "Michael," she began, her voice a reedy instrument of practiced solemnity, "we have something to discuss, as a family." I continued to slice a piece of turkey, the knife parting the tender white meat with a faint sigh. I did not look up. "We are discussing, are we not, Charlotte? Or is this the preamble to the annual Thanksgiving inquest into my life choices?" A flicker of irritation crossed her face. My refusal to play my assigned part always unnerved her. "This is serious," she insisted, her voice gaining an edge. "We've talked, all of us. We've been talking for months about you, about your influence, your presence." I finally raised my eyes to meet hers. "My presence," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. "You make me sound like a poltergeist or a particularly stubborn stain on the upholstery." "Don't be flippant," my father rumbled, his gaze finally shifting from the turkey to me. It was a look I knew well, the look of a patriarch whose authority had been questioned. "Your sister is trying to articulate a difficult but necessary truth." "Then let her articulate it," I said, gesturing with my fork. "The stage is yours, Lottie." She took a deep breath, puffing up her chest. It was a performance, and she was its star. "We have decided, as a collective," she announced, her eyes sweeping over the compliant faces of our parents and brother, "that our family unit is no longer tenable in its current configuration. We have taken a vote." A low, cold amusement began to bubble in my chest. A vote! How very civilized. How utterly absurd. They had turned the sacred, unspoken bonds of blood and shared history into a petty parliamentary procedure. A vote, I mused aloud. And what was the motion on the floor? Charlotte's chin lifted. She was in her element now, a martyr delivering a painful but just sentence. The motion was whether you still belong at this table, whether you are still one of us. She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes locking onto mine. "The vote was unanimous, Michael. We voted, and you're not family anymore." The words landed and detonated, not with a bang, but with the chilling silence that follows. And then the most extraordinary thing happened. A smile touched Julian's lips, a small, cruel thing. My mother let out a sigh that sounded suspiciously like relief. And my father, my stoic, unreadable father, gave a short, sharp nod of approval. A wave of soft, polite applause, led by Charlotte's own husband, Tom, rippled through the funereal air. They cheered. They actually cheered my excommunication. The cold amusement in my chest did not curdle into hurt or rage. Instead, it blossomed into a quiet, almost serene laughter. It escaped my lips as a soft, breathy chuckle. The sound was so unexpected, so contrary to the script they had written, that the cheering faltered and died. Their faces, moments before alight with triumphant solidarity, were now clouded with confusion. "Oh," I said, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of my eye. I pushed my chair back and rose slowly from the table. "I see. Well, in that case..." I reached down to the leather satchel I always carried, a bag they had often mocked as my dossier of secrets. I withdrew a thick navy blue folder, its cover unmarked, and placed it gently on the center of the table, next to the rapidly cooling platter of dismembered fowl. "Then you won't be needing this," I said, my voice soft, confessional. Charlotte stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. "What is that?" she demanded, her bravado beginning to fray. "I call it a family history, the one you were never meant to read. It's my Thanksgiving contribution, my parting gift." She hesitated. Her eyes darted to our father, who gave another almost imperceptible nod. He was curious, arrogant enough to believe no secret could touch him. With trembling fingers, Charlotte reached out and pulled the folder towards her. The room held its breath. She untied the simple string clasp and opened the cover. Her eyes scanned the first page. A low gasp escaped her lips. She flipped the second, then the third. Her face, which had been a mask of righteous certainty, began to crumble. The color drained from her cheeks, replaced by a ghastly, mottled pallor. Her breath came in ragged, shallow bursts. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, but it was too late to stifle the sound that tore from her throat. It was not a cry of anger or of sadness. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated horror, a sound that shattered the last vestiges of civility in the room and echoed off the polished walls of our perfect, hollow home. Chapter 2. The scream hung in the air long after it had ceased, a ghostly imprint on the suffocating silence. Charlotte's hand, the one that wasn't clamped over her mouth, was splayed across the open folder, as if to physically prevent the words on the page from leaping out and contaminating the air. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the document, but I knew she wasn't seeing it anymore. She was seeing the chasm that had just opened beneath her feet, a dark, fathomless abyss where the bedrock of her life used to be. Tom, her ever dull and sycophantic husband, rushed to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Lottie, what is it? My God, what's wrong?" He tried to peer at the page, but she shielded it with a convulsive shudder, a wounded animal protecting its fatal injury. "Get it away," she whimpered, the words mangled by her hand. "Get it away from me." My father, Arthur, finally stirred, his patriarchal composure fractured. He rose, his chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor, and strolled around the table. "Give me that," he commanded, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and a dawning, terrible curiosity. He did not ask. He simply took. He wrenched the folder from Charlotte's grasp, her fingers too weak to offer any resistance. I remained standing, a silent observer to the unraveling I had set in motion. I felt a strange detachment, the clinical calm of a surgeon who has made a necessary brutal incision and now waits for the ensuing hemorrhaging to cease. This was not an act of passion, but of precision, the culmination of years spent in the shadows, listening, watching, and compiling. They had called me a poltergeist, and in a way, they were right. I had haunted the halls of this house, an invisible repository for its myriad sins. Arthur adjusted his reading glasses, his lips a thin, hard line. He read the first page. Unlike Charlotte, he did not scream. His reaction was quieter, yet somehow more terrifying. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. His formidable frame, usually so upright and unyielding, seemed to shrink in on itself. He sank heavily into Charlotte's vacated chair, the folder held in a white-knuckled grip. "What is this, Michael?" he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "What devil's work is this?" "It's not work, Father," I replied, my tone even and measured. "It's a birth certificate." The room fell into a deeper state of shock. A birth certificate. So simple, so mundane, yet in this context, it was a weapon of mass destruction. "That's impossible," Eleanor, my mother, finally spoke, her voice thin and brittle. "Charlotte's birth certificate is in the safe." "Oh, I'm sure it is," I said, allowing myself a small, cold smile. "A very official, very proper document. But it is not the original. The one my father is currently holding is a certified copy of the true record, procured from a small, dusty courthouse in a town you've spent your entire life pretending doesn't exist. A town called Havenwood." The name landed like a stone in a still pond. I saw a flicker of recognition in my mother's eyes, a terror so profound it was almost imperceptible. Arthur's head snapped up, his eyes boring into mine. The mask of the powerful patriarch was gone, replaced by the raw, panicked face of a man whose foundational lie had just been exposed. The document in the folder was not, of course, Charlotte's. It was his. It was the birth certificate of one Arthur Gable, born to a penniless, unmarried mother in a backwater town. It was not the birth certificate of Arthur Sterling, the scion of an old money family, a man whose carefully constructed narrative began with a prestigious East Coast boarding school and a Sterling, a word he was so fond of, family lineage. Along with it, I continued, my voice cutting through the stunned silence, you will find a copy of a death certificate for a 1-year-old infant, also named Arthur Sterling, who died of influenza 67 years ago. A terrible tragedy. A tragedy that provided a convenient opening for a desperate, ambitious young man from the wrong side of the tracks to assume a new identity, an identity sold to his mother by the grieving, destitute, and alcoholic parents of the deceased child. A pittance to them, a kingdom for you. I let the words settle. I had given them the first truth, the cornerstone of our family's wealth. Our name, our entire social standing was a fraud. My father was not a Sterling. He was a Gable, a name he had buried so deep he had probably forgotten it himself. Our entire existence was predicated on a lie, purchased for the price of a few bottles of whiskey and a train ticket out of town. I turned my gaze to Charlotte, who was now weeping openly, her face buried in Tom's chest. "You see, Lottie," I said softly, "when you voted me out of the family, you were operating under a false premise. You were voting me out of a fiction, a ghost story we've been telling ourselves for so long, we started to believe it was true. The Sterling family you hold so dear doesn't exist. It died of a fever in a crib 67 years ago." Julian, who had been watching the exchange with a dazed expression, finally found his voice. "You're lying," he stammered, though the words lacked any conviction. "You faked these. This is some kind of sick joke." "Is it, Julian?" I gestured to the folder in our father's trembling hands. "Turn the page. You'll find the sworn affidavit from the private investigator I hired, a man who specializes in digging up buried things. He found the parish records. He found the neighbors, or what's left of them. He even found the grave, a tiny, unmarked plot at the edge of an old cemetery." Arthur made a choked sound, a guttural noise of absolute defeat. He didn't need to turn the page. He knew it was true. He had lived every day of his life with the knowledge of that tiny, unmarked grave. The scream that had been torn from Charlotte was not just one of horror. It was the agony of ontological shock. Her identity, her pride, her very name, all of it was a counterfeit. And I, the family pariah, had just handed her the receipt. Chapter 3. The aftermath of the first revelation was not one of rage, but of implosion. The magnificent edifice of the Sterling family, built on a foundation of stolen identity, had begun to collapse inward. Arthur sat catatonically, staring at the damning papers. Charlotte's sobs had subsided into a series of wrenching, hiccuping gasps. Only my mother, Eleanor, seemed to be holding herself together, but it was the rigid composure of a marble statue, cold and liable to shatter at the slightest touch. "Why?" Eleanor finally whispered, her eyes, the color of faded forget-me-nots, fixed on me. It was not a question of logistics, but of motive. "Why would you do this to us, to your father?" I walked slowly back to my place at the table, the seat of the accused, and looked at each of them in turn. My gaze was steady, my purpose clear. "Because you left me no choice," I said, my voice low and confessional. "You held a vote. You made a spectacle of my banishment. You treated family as a privilege that could be revoked by a show of hands. I simply decided to show you what this family you so righteously gatekeep is actually built upon." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. This was never about me, was it? It was about what I know. For years, I have been the keeper of the unspoken, the family confessor. You all came to me, one by one, with your dirty little secrets, assuming I was a vault. But a vault can be opened. You should have remembered that. I turned my attention to Julian. "You, brother, you were the first to come to me, weren't you? 6 months ago. Panicked? The SEC was sniffing around your firm. The creative accounting you'd been practicing was about to come to light. You needed money to cover the hole before the auditors arrived. $50,000. Where did you think I got it? I told you it was a loan from a friend." I paused, letting the memories surface in his panicked eyes. "Turn to section 2 of the folder, Julian. You'll find the paperwork. I didn't get a loan. I blackmailed Mr. Henderson, our dear neighbor, a man whose proclivities for underage companionship are well documented in the subfolder labeled Exhibit B. I used his filth to cover yours. You didn't just take my money. You made me a purveyor of it." Julian recoiled as if I had struck him. You wouldn't," he stammered. "I did," I said flatly. "The vote to cast me out was your attempt to sever the connection to your own culpability. If I am not family, then my sins are not your sins. A convenient absolution." My gaze shifted to my mother. She flinched, her porcelain composure cracking. "Mother, your headaches, your frequent charity retreats to that little spa upstate, you must have thought I was a fool. Did you really believe I didn't know about Daniel? The landscape architect with the poetic soul and the hands that knew how to replant a garden? Her face went ashen. Arthur, roused from his stupor by this new assault, looked from me to his wife, a slow, dawning horror on his face. "Section 3, Father," I said, my voice relentless. "You'll find photographs, hotel receipts, copies of emails so florid they would make a romance novelist blush. For 5 years, Eleanor Sterling, the perfect wife and matriarch, has been finding solace in another man's arms. I have known for 4. I said nothing. I kept your secret, Mother. I protected you. And in return, you voted against me. You cheered my removal. Was that your deal with Father? You'd help him get rid of his problem if he continued to ignore yours?" The unspoken had been spoken. The air crackled with the poison of it. Now it was time for the executioner herself. I turned to Charlotte, who had stopped crying and was now watching me with the look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "And you, Lottie," I said, my voice softening into a parody of pity. "My dearest sister, the prime mover of my little coup d'etat. Your perfect life with your perfect husband and your perfect children, the envy of the country club. But the tuition for those private schools is so expensive, isn't it? And Tom's consulting firm hasn't landed a real client in 2 years." Tom started to protest, a pathetic, blustering sound, but I cut him off with a look. "You didn't come to me with your secret," I continued, speaking only to Charlotte. "I found it myself. Section 4. The bank statements, the credit card bills, the second mortgage on your house that you took out without telling Father. You are drowning in debt. Over $500,000 of it. You were counting on your inheritance, weren't you? The Sterling fortune. You wanted me cut out, not just from the family, but from the will. Every percentage point matters when you're that far underwater." I picked up my wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid. "So you see, this isn't about my influence or my presence. This is about greed and infidelity and crime. I am not the disease in this family. I am a symptom of it. I am the mirror you have all been desperately avoiding, and today I finally forced you to look." I took a sip of wine. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of shock, but of recognition. The silence of souls laid bare. Each of them was trapped, not by my revelations, but by the truth of their own lives. They had tried to cut out the part of the body that felt the pain, hoping it would cure the cancer. But the cancer was in all of them. "The folder," I said, placing the glass down, "contains everything. The evidence of my father's fraud, Julian's crime, our mother's affair, and your impending bankruptcy, Charlotte. It is a comprehensive portrait of the Sterling family, a suicide note for our collective identity." I looked at Arthur, his face a ruin. "You can burn it, if you like, but you cannot unknow it. You cannot unsee what you have become." My confession was complete. I had shown them the rot beneath the floorboards, but as I looked at their shattered faces, I knew my work was not yet finished. There was one more secret in the folder, the final one, the one that explained not what they had done, but what I had become, the one that would turn their horror into something far, far worse. Chapter 4. The room had become a mausoleum of unspoken resentments. each person entombed with the fresh corpse of their own exposed secret. The air was thick with the ghosts of who they pretended to be. My father, the self-made man, was now a common thief. My mother, the virtuous matriarch and adulteress. My brother, the financial wizard, a petty criminal. My sister, the society queen, a bankrupt. They were no longer a family, but a collection of co-conspirators in a failed enterprise, and I was the auditor who had finally come to declare them insolvent. It was my father who finally broke the trance. He slowly, deliberately closed the navy blue folder. The sound was like a coffin lid shutting. He did not look at my mother or his other children. He looked only at me. And for the first time in my life, I saw something other than arrogance or disappointment in his eyes. I saw a flicker of understanding, a shared darkness. "There is more," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. This is all true. As God is my witness, it is all true, but it is not the reason. It is not the root of the rot. This is merely the canopy. The roots go deeper. My breath caught in my throat. I had underestimated him. I had assumed the exposure of his original sin would be the killing blow, that he would crumble completely. Instead, he seemed to be finding a strange, grim clarity in the wreckage. "You are your father's son," he continued, his voice a low, gravelly thing. "You don't do things by halves. This is not about money or affairs or even a name. This is about blood. Isn't it, Michael?" My carefully constructed composure, the surgeon's calm, began to waver. He was steering us into a territory I had intended to control, to reveal on my own terms. Charlotte looked up, her face tear-streaked and blotchy. "What is he talking about? What could possibly be worse than this?" "Him," Arthur said, his finger rising to point at me. "He is worse than this. All of this," he swept his hand to encompass the ruined dinner, the folder, the shattered lives, "is an elaborate, monstrous distraction from the one secret he holds that matters, the one that is truly his." My mother let out a low moan. "Arthur, don't." "Be silent, Eleanor," he commanded, with a flash of his old authority. "He started this. He will see it through to its bitter end." He turned his gaze back to me. "They voted you out because you are a constant reminder of their own weakness, their own hypocrisy. That is true. But he leaned forward, I voted you out for what you did, for what you are." A cold dread, colder than any I had felt before, began to seep into my bones. The narrative was slipping from my grasp. "You talk of my sins," my father said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But you have forgotten the original sin of this house, the one that predates all others. We don't speak his name. We haven't for 20 years, but you see him every day. Don't you, Michael? You see him in your own reflection." He was talking about Leo, my younger brother, the ghost at this feast, the one name that had not been spoken. Leo, who had died at the age of 10. Leo, the golden child, the one who was effortlessly charming, brilliant, and loved. The one who was destined to be the true heir to the Sterling or Gable legacy. His death had been ruled an accident, a tragic fall from the old oak tree in the back garden. "The vote wasn't about your knowledge of our secrets," my father continued, his voice now filled with a terrible, resonant grief. "It was an exorcism. We were trying to cast you out because you have been haunting this family for 2 decades. You were there that day. You were the only one with him. Suddenly, all eyes were on me, but their expressions had changed. The shock and hatred had been supplanted by something older, a deep well of suspicion and pain. They saw me not as the avenging angel of truth, but something else entirely. They saw me as the boy under the oak tree.
"It was an accident," I said, my voice hoarse. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "He slipped. I tried to catch him." "Did you?" Charlotte hissed, her voice dripping with the venom that had been brewing for 20 years. "Or did you watch him fall? Did you want him gone? The perfect one? The one who made you invisible?" This was their truth. This was the secret I had not accounted for, because I had believed it was mine alone. My complicity, my guilt, was a private torment. I had never imagined it was a shared conviction. They didn't just suspect me, they knew. They had built their entire dysfunctional lives around this single, unspoken certainty that I was responsible for the death of their beloved Leo. Their petty sins of adultery and finance were nothing compared to the specter of fratricide. "There is another section in the folder," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Section 5. The last one." My father pushed the folder across the table towards me. "No," he said, with an air of finality. "Some things are better left buried. We know what you are, Michael. We have always known. Now your little performance is over. You have had your revenge. You have burned the house down, but you will always be the one holding the match." He stood up, no longer a broken man, but a man who had found a new, terrible purpose in an old grief. "Get out of my house." He thought he had won. He thought he had wrested control of the narrative, painting me as the monster, the source of all their pain. He believed the final secret was the one they all shared, the one they had used to justify their vote. He was wrong. He had no conception of the depths I was capable of. He had stopped at the root of the tree, but the real horror lay in the seed from which it had sprung. I opened the folder to the final section, my hand shaking now, not from fear, but from a terrible surging power. "You think you know," I said, my voice trembling with the force of my confession. "You think you know what happened that day. You are children playing with shadows. You don't know the first thing about darkness." I pulled out the last document. It wasn't a birth certificate or a bank statement. It was a single, yellowed page, torn from a child's diary. The handwriting was mine, a clumsy, juvenile scrawl. And at the bottom of the page was a small, crude drawing of an oak tree and 2 figures, one at the top and one at the bottom, and a single sentence written with the chilling, simple clarity of a 10-year-old. Chapter 5. The final page lay on the table between us, a pale, brittle leaf in the wreckage of our Thanksgiving feast. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled by a truth more terrible than any they could have imagined. My father remained standing, his face a mask of grim conviction, believing he had already plumbed the depths of my depravity. My mother, Charlotte, and Julian were frozen, their eyes fixed on that single sheet of paper, the final secret in my dossier of ruin. "You speak of Leo's death as the original sin," I began, my voice regaining its cold, steady cadence. The tremor was gone, replaced by the placid calm of a man who has nothing left to lose,
because he has already orchestrated the loss of everything. You are correct. Everything that came after, father's relentless ambition, mother's search for solace, Julian's recklessness, Charlotte's desperate grasping for status, it all grew from the cracked earth of that day. You used my supposed guilt as the fertile ground for your own transgressions. The family is already broken, you told yourselves, so what does one more crack matter? I looked directly at my father. You called my actions a distraction. You are mistaken. They were a predicate, a foundation. I could not deliver the final truth until you understood the full scope of the lies you were living. I had to dismantle the house, brick by brick, before I could show you the rot in the cornerstone. I nudged the diary page with my fingertip. You believe I watched him fall, that in a moment of childish jealousy, I failed to act. You paint me as a passive monster, a villain of omission. I allowed a small, bleak smile to touch my lips. The truth is so much simpler and so much more pure.
My gaze fell upon Charlotte. You asked what could possibly be worse. Let me answer your question. With a slow, deliberate movement, I turned the page so they could all read the childish scrawl. The date was written at the top, October 14th, the day before the accident. The sentence at the bottom was stark, stripped of all ambiguity. It read, "Tomorrow I will break the branch so Leo falls." A collective gasp went through the room, a sharp, ragged intake of breath. The air crackled, charged with a new, unspeakable horror. It was one thing to suspect a child of inaction, of a momentary, wicked failure. It was another thing entirely to be faced with the cold, premeditated proof of a murder. "I didn't watch him fall," I said, my voice as soft as falling snow. "I made him fall. I spent a week sawing partway through that thick branch, the one he loved to stand on to survey his kingdom. I covered my work with mud and leaves. I knew exactly when it would break. It was not an act of passion. It was a calculated, strategic decision." My father sank back into his chair, his face utterly blank, his mind unable to process the magnitude of what I was saying. My mother began to rock back and forth, a low, keening sound escaping her lips. "But why?" Julian whispered, his face a portrait of horrified disbelief. "He was your brother. He was 10 years old." "Precisely. He was 10 years old, and he was already perfect. He was the sun around which you all orbited. He was the true Sterling, the one in whom all of Father's hopes resided. I was ancillary, a shadow. I understood, even then, that there was no room for both of us in this family's narrative. One of us had to be excised. I simply chose who." I leaned back in my chair, the confessor at the end of his confession, drained but triumphant. My entire life since that day has been an act of theater, the quiet, resentful brother, the keeper of secrets. I allowed you to suspect me of the lesser crime, to build your lives around the comfortable, unspoken myth of my guilt. Because it bound you to me, it made me the center of the family's secret, just as Leo had been the center of its love. "My God," Arthur breathed, the words barely audible. "You are a monster." "Am I?" I countered, my voice laced with genuine curiosity. "Or am I simply the most honest person in this room? I am a Gable, just like you, Father. I took what I wanted. I eliminated a rival. I built my identity on a foundational act of profound violence. The only difference between us is that my victim was our own blood,
And I have never, for 1 second, pretended it was anything other than what it was, a choice. I stood up, my work now complete. The folder lay open, a testament to the utter destruction of a family. The birth certificate, the financial records, the photographs, and at the very end, the childish murder plot. It was a perfect, terrible history. You voted me out, I said, looking at each of their broken faces. You declared I am not family. You are correct. I am not like you. You are weak, sentimental hypocrites, hiding your pathetic little sins behind a wall of decorum. I am something else entirely. I am the architect of this family's reality. I have been since I was 10 years old. I walked towards the door of the dining room, leaving them to their ruin. I did not need to be a part of their family anymore. I had never truly been a part of it. I had been its creator and its destroyer, the author of its beginning and its end. As my hand touched the doorknob, I heard a sound from behind me. It was not a cry or a word. It was the sound of my father, the great Arthur Sterling, the imposter Arthur Gable, beginning to weep. Not the tears of a grieving parent, but the helpless, soul-shattering sobs of a man who has just realized that the monster he has feared his entire life was not the one he had cast out, but the one he had created. I walked out and closed the door softly behind me, leaving them to the deafening silence and the chilling truth of what family truly meant. Stories are born from emotions. If this story evoked any feelings in you, share your thoughts. Every comment you make is a spark of inspiration for new stories about struggle, strength, and hope that does not fade even in the harshest reality.